How to Read Poetry Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster.
Chapter 2. Sounds Beyond Sense. Sentences make sounds. What a concept! But poems are full of sounds and not all of them are meaningful. The sounds in a poem can prove useful beyond their work in creating meaning. Or rather, not all of them are present because of their contribution to meaning. The sounds that inhabit poems can become signature elements of poets' work. C. Miss Heaney, for instance, loved the word plash, which I'm guessing you have rarely had occasion to use. Or plosive, another favorite. Heaney is so known for his love of strong consonants, especially those hard g and k sounds that come down to us from our Germanic linguistic ancestors, that the critic and professor Philip Hobsbawm said of one of his volumes that it was full of the plop and gurgle of Heaney speak. He is one of a kind, but far from the only poet to consider sounds in their own right. In order to get anywhere with this consideration of sound, we need a divorce. If this were a discussion of music, we could easily effect a separation between the melody and the lyrics. But when the source of the musicality is also the source of meaning, matters become trickier. The words contain the melody, the harmony, the counterpoint. So we have to push past words to their constituent sounds. If we blow the word plash apart, for instance, we have 3 items to work with. Pl, a short ah, as in hat, and sh, 2 consonant clusters and a vowel sound. We need to get some concept out of the way here. Consonants occur in pairs where one is said with a voice and one isn't. P and B, for instance, are both formed by bringing the lips together and then parting them with a puff of air. Because to make the B sound you add a little voice to it, it is called, oddly enough, voiced. By contrast, P is voiceless. That means that you can't say pay. Oh crap. That means that you can't say it with your voice, since then it turns into a B sound. Try it. Say pay and bay normally, then try saying pay while making sure to add your voice to the P. Pay. To say pay, you can't bring your voice, To say pay, you can't bring your voice in until after the P. If you do, you say bay. As a result of this phenomenon, and you should always feel phenomenal just about now, a word beginning with P is always going to sound more, plosive than one starting with B. Consonants, by the way, are classified as plosives, fricatives, ligyds, and words like glottal and bilabial, to say nothing of alveopalatal and interdental sneak in. We'll try to avoid them as much as possible. When linguists talk shop, about half the time it sounds like some sort of pornographic code, and that wouldn't do, would it? Add to that plosive P the liquid, meaning the way the L and R are formed in the mouth of the L, right after P, and then the short A in the middle, and that sibilant sh at the end, and you have a word that sounds like what it means, beginning with a hard bounce on the diving board and ending with a ripped entry into the water. What's not to love? Plash indeed. Boggled yet? Sorry about that. What we're saying is that we can break words down into their sounds, and at that level, as with quantum physics, things get a little strange. But once you know how letters and their possible sounds work, you can have all kinds of fun. Poets string together similar sounds all the time. If they happen at the beginning of words, as in strange similar sounds, we call that alliteration. If they are sprinkled through a passage, but not necessarily next door to one another, or even in the same place in the words, we call that consonants, if they're consonants, naturally. Or assonants, if they're vowels, less naturally, but just go with it. If they're happening at the ends of words in large enough groups, we speak of rhyme, which is the one you already know for sure. Rhyme requires critical mass. The mere presence of S at the ends of words does not constitute rhyme, nor even ers, but words ending in thers, as in fathers and mothers, just might work, even if the first syllables don't align. Let's spend a moment here to give body to these abstractions. Alliteration. A series of words in succession, or near succession, all beginning with the same sound, as in Shakespeare's Sonnet 30, which begins, "When to the sessions of sweet silent thought." It doesn't matter right now whether we understand this or not. The repeated initial S sounds in sessions of sweet silent create a soundscape to begin the poem. That sibilance is enhanced by the second S in sessions, and I've always suspected the th of thought. That's a mighty soft sound palette, but for our term, only the initial sounds matter. Consonants. A series of words in close proximity employing the same or related sounds. The more familiar alliteration is a special instance of consonants in which the repeated sounds appear at the beginning of words. More generally, however, consonant repetition can appear anywhere in the words. The final two lines of Emily Dickinson's "'Twas later when the summer went" demonstrate consonants using both T and th sounds. Yet that pathetic pendulum keeps esoteric time. That's 5 instances of T in 2 short lines, plus 2 uses of th and 1 D, which acts as a sort of bridge between the two, being the voiced partner to the unvoiced T. And we can throw in 3 uses of the hard CK in pathetic, keeps esoteric. Virtually every word here is adding to the soundscape of the lines. Note that, unlike alliteration, these sounds occur at various points in words. The poem as a whole, only 8 lines, is often cited for its consonants using M and N sounds. And while these 2 lines maintain that pattern, they establish one of their own. Assonance. A series of uses of the same vowel sound in close proximity. Using the same Dickinson poem, we can note that the short E sound appears in yet, pathetic, and pendulum and esoteric. We can debate whether that sound is compromised in the last instance by the R that follows it, but I think that counts. What does all this mean for poetry readers? Chiefly that we spend a good deal of time tracing patterns not of words but of letters and their associated sounds. Or sometimes we don't because we're bludgeoned by it. Gerard Manley Hopkins, 1844 through 89, one of the strangest poets ever to write in English, has a line in his poem, The Windhover, that's a real showstopper. "Sheer plod makes plow down Sicilian shine." Don't know what it means? Neither does anyone else, and I have some doubts about Hopkins himself. First of all, you'd have to know that Sicilian is an archaism for furrow, and no student has ever known that, ever. And then he leaves off the ending of plodding, which knocks us for a loop, and loses a possible "the" before plow and Sicilian, each of which would be a nice touch. If we restore those, the meaning is something like, "The drudgery of the plow going through the furrow keeps it shiny." Remember, this was in an age before tractors and plowing behind a horse or mule was the very essence of plodding. But who cares? The line is a blast to say out loud. Why is that? It's the way that Hopkins stacks up familial sounds. S and sh appear 4 times. Sheer plod makes plow down Sicilian shine. P twice. R and L combined 4 times. And then there are the vowels. The O in plod morphs into a long oo in plow and down before changing again into a short yo in Sicilian. The long E of sheer chimes, if only slightly, with the short I of Sicilian, and then lengthens into shine. And it's a sonnet, so there are 13 more lines that are just as wacky, which is why he's one of my favorite poets, and, as you might suppose, of our plashing friend, the young Heaney. Right there, I think, is the basic tension of poetry. Meaning lies in words, melody, and sounds. The trick lies in bringing them together. Too little emphasis on sounds, you've got prose, and not necessarily very interesting prose. Too little emphasis on words, you can wind up with gibberish. Lovely gibberish, perhaps, but nonsense nonetheless. But are words made out of sounds, you ask? And therefore sounds only exist in words? Yes, but that doesn't mean they inevitably play nicely together. Stay tuned. Remember plash? It leads us to another element of words as sounds, onomatopoeia, or words that sound like the things they describe. Sometimes they are single words, sometimes whole passages, even whole poems, as in Edgar Allan Poe's The Bells. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells! What a world of merriment their melody foretells! How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme, to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. 1849. The first part will be plenty for our purposes here. Gee, do you think that Poe wants us to hear bells? It isn't just the word bells repeated over and over and over again, and over some more. It's also the jingling and the tinkling that's going on, along with all of the L sounds going throughout the passage, from sledges to silver to crystalline to musically, not to mention the several words that rhyme with bells, and in their midst that percussive tintinnabulation, sounding like a series of clapper strikes. Later in the poem, the sounds that go with the bells won't be so bright, as in the final movement where when we hear funeral bells moan. Here, though, all is air and light. The poem is exemplary. Depending on your point of view, this is either a great example of onomatopoeia or a cautionary warning that such things can be taken too far. Regardless of how we may see the outcome, we have to accept that there are few poems so thoroughgoing and seeking to embody the sounds they describe. How about another poem with bells, but maybe less bombast? And anyone lived in a pretty how town, and yes, that is worded accurately. E. Cummings has this line, with up so floating many bells down, twice. We will investigate the case of the fractured word order elsewhere. For the moment, however, I only want you to hear what the line says about the sound of bells. Consider how, first, the peal of a bell seems to float out on the air before it dissipates in what we may hear as a soft landing back on earth. As we read the poem aloud, we should register the participle floating as a lighter, less concluded sound than float or floats. In fact, we may well hear, I do, the line as two halves, the area with up so floating, taking us to a turning point where many bells down not only carries us earthward in meaning, but also ends on the heavier final sound and down. He further accentuates the sounds of bells through self-rhymes, all by all and deep by deep, as well as straightforward onomatopoeia, woman and men, both dong and ding, and rather thoroughgoing sound repetitions throughout the poem. Less blustering than Poe's belfry, perhaps, but memorable nonetheless. Piling up sounds. In The Sounds of Poetry, Robert Pinsky introduces the terms consonant thread and vowel thread for the scarier consonants and assonants. This is probably a useful switch, being more descriptive, especially since few things can bring the young at heart to giggles quicker than assonants, particularly as you write it on the board. What he is talking about, however, is absolutely central to the poetic project. How does a particular poem stack up vowel or consonant sounds, and what is the effect of that stacking? One possible effect might be, for some readers, too much. I am rather a fan of too muchness, but that position is not universal. Here would be Exhibit A, the octave, first 8 lines of that Hopkins sonnet, The Windover. I caught this morning's minion king, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn-drawn falcon, in his riding. Of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing, in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding. Rebuffed the big wind, my heart in hiding, stirred for a bird, the achieve of the mastery of the thing. Woo! Try that one out loud. Actually, it is one of my favorites to read aloud, partly because the opportunities to crash and burn are so numerous, and partly because, as day 2 fodder in my British modernism course, and made everything after it seem pretty tame. That's more alliteration than most poets would be willing to undertake. Really, split kingdom at the end of line 1 because a mere 5 words starting with D in line 2 was insufficient? To see consonants, or consonant threading, at work, look at the following line with all the liquid sounds. Of the rolling level underneath him, steady air and striding, high there, appearing in initial, middle, and terminal positions in the words. And indeed, it carries over to the line 4, where the R sounds shift to W sounds and wimpling wing. It's actually hard to read that without sounding like Elmer Fudd. So dominant are those liquid sounds in the 2 lines that we might not notice the frequency of nasal consonants, M and N, so called because there's a push of air from the nostril when saying them. That would be unfortunate by my count. There are 10 of them there. One more audacious thing about those 8 lines, the rhyme scheme. The pattern of rhymed lines, which we usually indicate by an individual letter for each sound, is A. Okay. A. Who does that? Hopkins, that's who. It's actually a great relief when the set, the final 6 lines, sestet, 6 lines, rhyme BC. Variety is good. You can read pretty much the rest of poetry in English and not find anyone like Hopkins. He bases his personal poetics on a very old Welsh practice called singaned, a system of stress, alliteration, repetition, and rhyme. The rules are too complex to go into here, but they fit in with Hopkins' own tendencies to wreak havoc on normal meter with what he called sprung rhythm, in which he moves stresses, by means of capitalization, boldface, and exclamation marks, onto syllables or words not normally stressed to get idiosyncratic effects. And they are idiosyncratic, all right. But what's the point of using the sounds letters can make if not to wring all the music possible from them?